Since 2019, KXAN investigators have tracked the way Texas law enforcement reports missing persons cases to a public database that has helped find loved ones and bring families closure. During our reporting, Texas became one of a handful of states to require police to share critical details with the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System, or NamUs. But our team also found loopholes in the law allowing potentially thousands of cases to fall through the cracks, prompting lawmakers to take a closer look at transparency and accountability. Today, on a special edition of Inside the Investigation, we take a closer look from the vault at our team's project called Mayberry Texas. Hello and welcome to a special edition of Inside the Investigation. I'm KXAN Investigative Director Josh Hinkle. I'm joined today by investigative reporter Arezow Doost, and we're bringing you another edition of our From the Vault series, where each month we dive into a past project that our team has investigated. And today we're talking about one of my favorites, Mayberry, Texas. This is kind of something that started a lot of the innovation at KXAN, and I'm excited to kind of see how it has updated over the years because this came out in 2019. For those of you that haven't seen Mayberry, Texas, if you're watching this on the KXAN Plus app, you can go back and see this right before. If you are seeing this on our KXAN.com website, you can see the video for that entire docuseries and the subsequent stories that we did called Missing in Texas that came out after that below this video in this article online. But missing persons is what this one's all about, hence Missing in Texas. And it started with Mayberry, Texas, which was a docuseries we launched in 2019. Mayberry, Texas is kind of a fun play on words, I think, because the town we really focused our storytelling on was actually Kennedy, Texas, which is in South Texas. But we chose the title Mayberry, Texas, because Kennedy is kind of that reminiscent small town vibe. Mayberry obviously is from the Andy Griffith Show. And so we kind of wanted to play on that a little bit to make it feel like this could happen anywhere in any small town, because what we were talking about was families that were losing loved ones or their loved ones going missing. And it was a lot of sad stories, but a lot of hopeful ideas came out of this, and even some legislation that got passed. So we're going to dive all through those updates today. First, let's talk about Mayberry, Texas. Kennedy, Texas was the setting for the original docuseries, where we focused on this family whose last name was Mayberry. Jamie Mayberry was a person who went missing from their home in Kennedy in 1999. And that's kind of how we highlighted that case and kind of told some problems that were happening with missing person cases across Texas. When we first decided to dive into this topic, you and I and some of our colleagues, we traveled to Kennedy before we started shooting anything because we really wanted to get a lay of the land. What was Kennedy like when we first stepped foot there?
It was so interesting to go there. It was like any other small town, really quaint downtown area, quiet, friendly people, very curious as far as what we were doing there. But when you walk through the streets, we had a purpose. So it almost felt like there was something haunting us to keep going street to street, to keep exploring the different businesses, to see what they remembered and what they knew of the story that we were digging into.
Yeah, it actually reminded me a lot of the small town that I grew up in, Oklahoma. Everyone knows everyone there, and that's how it was in Kennedy also. And everyone knew about this case of Jamie Mayberry. They all remembered this person going missing in 1999. The case was still unsolved. Jamie had never been found, and it was very mysterious circumstances how they actually went away from their home in the middle of the night and then just kind of vanished. So we'll get back to that case a little bit later, but out of this, what we found was that Texas law enforcement was not really following a system that was optional at the time to actually have people that were missing put into a public database that you or I or any members of the public could access to see if there were details that maybe we could share with others in hopes of locating some of these missing people. And it's actually worked in a lot of cases across America, but there were no requirement for police departments in the state at the time to use that missing persons database until our stories got involved and inspired legislation that eventually it took a couple of sessions to come to fruition, but really kind of explained to us how Mayberry, Texas morphed into Missing in Texas and became a larger project about what happened here in this building, the state capitol, and passing legislation.
Well, Josh, as you remember, when we started in Kennedy and just looking at the Mayberry case, not a lot of law enforcement agencies were aware of this National Missing and Unidentified Persons database, NamUs. It was actually based in Fort Worth. So it was right in our backyard, and where you could go for resources, you could reach out for help. But because people didn't know about it, it wasn't being accessed like it is today. And so the families who are behind the legislation that finally passed in Texas, they're the ones who brought light to this through our investigation in Mayberry. We traveled to Houston after Kennedy to talk to Alice Almendarez, who had been searching for her father for 12 years and who had known about this database because experts in that arena notified her of it. So this actually started out to where not a lot of people knew about it across the state, but with case after case, they started learning more about it. And as a result, one of our state representatives figured out about it just knocking on doors before election, and learned about, like, there was a family out of Houston, another family, the Fritz family, who'd been looking for their son, a Marine, for 2 years and needed closure, needed answers. And she was horrified that there was no system for families to turn to make this process easier for them.
And so through this whole process with the legislature, this law, which was eventually called what?
The John and Joseph's Law in past 2021.
Yeah, so it was named after those two gentlemen that you just talked about. It did pass, so it basically requires all police departments, medical examiners, justices of the peace to submit, when a missing person case is filed with them, they have to submit it to NamUs so the public can access this, right?
Absolutely. So they have within 60 days of a missing persons report officially being filed to get all of these details into the NamUs database. And what we're talking about is fingerprints, dental records, any physical characteristics that would help out in this case. Now, some of that information is going to be only for law enforcement eyes, but a lot of the information is available to the public. So you and I, anyone can go on this website, search for a loved one, a friend, anyone in the community that they're looking for, and have specific details to go by.
Well, just because the law passed doesn't mean that everything's perfect. And we kept following up with it and found that there were still some challenges with implementing the law and making sure that every law enforcement agency, there are thousands in Texas, by the way, was actually following this. And what we found was they weren't all following it. The law didn't really have any teeth. There was no real enforcement mechanism, someone going through and checking and making sure that everyone was playing by the rules. There was no, type of punishment, and no one would get fined or go to jail or whatever if they weren't following it. So that was something we followed back up with the lawmaker who filed the original legislation. She told us at the time it was kind of a wait and see kind of moment because they wanted to make sure that everyone was educated on what the law was before they revisited it. So what eventually happened there?
Well, that's exactly what it was. Representative Lacey Hall told us the biggest thing is education when a new law is passed, and awareness, and it's going to take years. And it has. Given the fact that not a lot of law enforcement agencies were aware of this database to begin with. So the key was, one, notifying awareness, right? And then two, getting people used to entering the data into the database and the information into the database. This is crucial because it's nationwide. The families who helped push this legislation in Texas say, look, that was the biggest hurdle, getting a law passed. But year to year, we've still heard that there is more that can be done. In fact, I was just talking to Alice Almendarez and David Fritz, the families whose sons and father are named after this law. And they were saying, there's got to be accountability. it's great to have a law like this on the books, but what now? How do we know all the police departments, sheriff's offices, medical examiners, justice of the peace, how do we know they're following this? And if there is no accountability, then it may not get done, especially when resources are limited. So they're going to be pushing for more enforcement measures this next legislative session. In fact, they're already talking about it, which is great. And, there was some changes with the NamUs system, it was based in Fort Worth, but over the last several years, it's moved to North Carolina. And so there's been some changes to how it works and gaps for families. Nothing too crucial to where you and I would notice, but enough to make a dent. But as a result of this database, 16 states now have this mandate to require law enforcement agencies to enter this information into the NamUs database, Texas, of course, being one of them. And even though more cases are being entered into the database today, the families say that more can be done.
We are talking about the families. We mentioned Jamie Mayberry at the beginning of our conversation. His information was eventually added to NamUs. It wasn't at the beginning of his case, but eventually it was. And while he still hasn't been found, his family felt like at least they got his information out there and people were aware of his case. I mean, it was one of the reasons we found his case in the first place was because it was on NamUs, and we were looking for missing persons cases that, would allow us to tell a story and really help highlight something that people could identify with. And I think losing a loved one is probably one of the most difficult things that a family can do. When we were in Kennedy and as we started putting the story together, what were some of your thoughts as you were listening to the interviews that we did with his family and the people that really kind of knew some details about his case?
This was a very loved family, still is a very loved family in that community. And people want to see them have closure and have answers. And in a situation like that, they were willing to do anything just to have some closure to their loved one so they could move on. So the fact that they felt like they were being listened to and heard was really monumental in this case. And because of them, all these other cases, they've had a light being shined on them, and that is crucial. The families we talked to today are thankful to the Mayberrys because the light that they brought to such a dark topic of missing people.
Yeah, and I really want Jamie Mayberry's family to know that their story has helped other people. While they might not have the closure that they want and need at this point, at least their story has gotten out there. It's helped inspire legislation. It has helped, we know, other families get their information into this database and hopefully their own closure. One of the people that was pivotal in this story was Terry Mayberry, who was Jamie Mayberry's older brother. Terry met us in Kennedy, which is where he grew up. It was a very sad story for him to recount, and I just remember it being very emotional. He was there with his niece, who was the last person to see Jamie alive. They believe that Jamie is dead at this point. Terry Mayberry, hearing it from a brother's perspective, I felt like any sibling. I have a little brother too, and I can't imagine what it would be like to just not have any answers for so long and to feel like law enforcement wasn't really paying attention to the case the way that they wanted to. What did you think when you heard from Terry in those interviews?
It was heart-wrenching because here they were so long ago, reliving something so personal, but doing it because they felt like there was some kind of hope. Not only for the Mayberry case, but also for others having gone through this heartbreak that cannot be imagined, right? And so for them to open up to us the way they have, and they still continue to stay in touch, and they're so supportive of the work that continues to be done on behalf of the Mayberry name.
And we're still covering this thing because 2019 was, almost 6 years ago, and it is something that we have continued to update them on. And as the story has, focused on other families and everything, we didn't want the Mayberrys to be forgotten, to understand that their story is still out there. Every time that we do a follow-up to this, we share their story again. We talk about Jamie. Sadly, we found out last week that Terry Mayberry has passed away. So our condolences go to his family, and understand that that's a very difficult time. I understand the services will be in Kennedy as well, so probably a big family gathering there in their hometown. Probably, brings back painful memories, but we just want to let the Mayberry family know that we're thinking of them and that we appreciate them, and that we appreciate everything that Terry did to keep this story alive.
We've always thought about them, and I will never forget you had a picture that you'd printed, because that was our goal. Our goal was the answers. And anytime walking by, we would think about the Mayberrys. It's hard not to think about what they've gone through and what they were searching for. And then to meet other families that have such similar experiences, that's what they're trying to prevent. And they've helped so many by just sharing perspective and saying, we know what you're going through. We've been through it. We're still going through it. Here's how we overcame it.
Yeah, the picture that you're mentioning was a picture of Jamie Mayberry. It still sits on my desk today, just a reminder of the type of work we do, why we do it, and just to not lose sight of that. Interestingly, this is still one of those stories that I still get a lot of questions about when we do workshops and panels about investigative journalism. People just Googling our team or my name, they've happen upon either the podcast or the docuseries portion where I tracked down one of the suspects that was listed on the original police report from back in 1999, who has been also, a point of focus for law enforcement in the Kennedy area for various reasons. Was difficult to track down back when we first started doing this, was living in rural South Texas, and our photographer at that point, Andrew Choate, and I drove to her house. And what ultimately happened was we knocked on the door, and when she found out what we were asking about, we were asked to leave, and if we didn't leave, she was going to shoot us. And so I'd never really been threatened like that before. Of course, backed away, and we left. But since then, we've still tried to follow the case. Police have since looked at the case, taken another review of it. No new leads have come up that they've found credible, but they do say if you have any information about Jamie Mayberry's whereabouts, or any information about what might have happened to him or his case, to contact Kennedy Police, because they are the point of contact for this case at this point, and they're still open to solving it if that's even possible.
That's all the family's looking for, is closure at this point.
Mm-hmm. One of the things about Mayberry, Texas, that I mentioned at the top of this conversation, and why it's so exciting, is because this was the project that launched our Catalyst team. If you aren't familiar with Catalyst, it is a subunit within our KXAN Investigative team that focuses on digital-first storytelling. So we really try to put everything that we have been compiling about a big project out to the digital world, online, in many different ways, so it will be consumed by as many people as possible in a way that we might not get to do on the 10 o'clock news, because we have a little bit more time, a different type of format. These projects each involved a digital docuseries, multi-part, a podcast that accompanies that called Catalyst, a digital immersive webpage with each project, and we're currently working on our 8th one at this point, which is wild to me that we've kept it going this long, but it's been part of the exciting portion of the innovation of our investigations. And one of the reasons I've really enjoyed the work we do at KXAN, because not only are we getting to put together something really cool, but we're getting to do something that's very impactful and getting a lot of attention. And I get to work with a fun team like you. You've been involved in every single one of those
Very lucky
projects.
to have, yeah.
I'm excited for people to see the one that will be coming out in February. I can't tell you what it is just yet. Trade secrets, right? But it's one that people will talk about a lot here in the Austin area, because it's several cases that have been highlighted, and a very dark mystery around it. And that's kind of a common theme with most of our Catalyst projects, that most of them have involved kind of a criminal aspect, but there's always a tie to some type of policy change that's a potential or a solution. And that's one of the things we like about this too. It's impact reporting. It's not just reporting something that is, information that we're putting out there, we're talking to the people that have the power to make a change with whatever problem we're highlighting, and then continuing to follow through with that. After we launch each Catalyst project, there are multiple follow-ups. Some of them have gone on for years, like Mayberry, Texas, where we see a law through and then make sure that that law is working and that, it's not falling by the wayside, and all of our work and the work of the people that we've interviewed is not for nothing.
It all goes back to the family and the communities that we serve. And, how grateful are we that we're trusted with these stories and that we get to tell these stories. But yes, as you mentioned, at the end of the day, the solution, that's why we're doing it. We're looking for solutions that's going to help that next family not have to go through the heartache that we are seeing firsthand.
Mm-hmm. We've done several different topics, everything from missing persons to medical debt to deaths in custody and like in jail custody or police custody. We have done things about the LGBTQ plus community. We've also talked about the medical examiner process in Texas. That was our most recent one with hanging on Backbone Creek. If you haven't checked that one out, please do. That was what we've been working on for the past year. And, I think that one of the things we'll be talking about in the next episode of From the Vault, which is going to be in January, is our second Catalyst project, which was the A History of Mass Violence project. And this was something that we dived into when we started noticing a lot of talk about mass shootings that were happening in Texas. And this was even before the Uvalde tragedy. This was happening right after the El Paso Walmart shooting. So, if you want to get a closer look at that, we will be updating on where some of those policy decisions are, where that story has led next month. So be sure to tune into an episode of From the Vault then. Thank you for joining me today, Arezow. I appreciate it. You can watch all new episodes of Inside the Investigation on the KXAN Plus Smart TV app every Friday. You can also listen to an audio version on KXAN's Investigative podcast with new episodes every Saturday morning wherever you get podcasts.